Good evening, everybody. A very warm welcome to Kaizen Central. I'm Nick Peters, as I'm pretty sure you all know by now. But it's great to see everybody on this early summer's evening. I don't know what it's like your end, but the sun has only just managed to come out after being a very gloomy day on the South Coast. I'm delighted to welcome Tony Haig to join us today. Have I managed to stop? Sorry, I beg your pardon. There we go. Yes, so Tony Haig wrote this excellent article in the Manufacturer a few weeks ago, which was basically entitled "Make or Buy?" Tony, I think was the headline.
Make versus buy, the multi-million-pound manufacturing question, I think, is the way the manufacturer termed it.
Well, that wasn't at all any hyperbole attached to that, I'm convinced. I mean, being a journalist, that's the last thing in the world we would ever dream of adding to a piece of work. But as I read it, I was struck by two things, really. One was the enormously complex matrix almost of options, opportunities and challenges facing companies at the moment as the supply chains around the world some of them are fractured, some have become too elongated, some are seeking to shrink. There's a tremendous pressure for reshoring, as if reshoring was the panacea that is going to make everything in the garden rosy in the future. I know that's not your view at all, Tony, but perhaps you could sort of set out your stall, if you like, in terms of this argument. I know there are an awful lot of people here who are experienced manufacturers who'd love to get into the conversation and try and unpick some of this.
Yes, certainly, Nick. I mean, without obviously reading through the article, which people may have seen, is I guess what triggered the article. I guess the whole subject of manufacturing and how manufacturing has changed dramatically, and changed even more so dramatically over the last 2 years with all of the complications and all of the disruption we've faced. And those changes aren't just process changes; they're attitude changes, cultural changes. We see as manufacturers now that where we had large scalable factories where the focus was on just that size and scale, it was on lean. Now it's more about agility, flexibility, customization of product for customers. So an awful lot has changed. And I think the disruption of the last 18 months has only accelerated the thoughts and the processes about that change now. And people are looking, you mentioned it just, Nick, about supply chain risk and total cost of manufacture. They're also looking at the sustainability element of where goods come from and shipping of goods. So I think you mentioned just about factories in the last 12 months and actually even now with all that's going on in the world with material shortages, large factories have been brought to their knees, and some factories are still operating in a relatively sort of serious situation with part shortages. And that's really what bore about the whole sort of article that was wrote for the manufacturer sort of some time ago. So we've got a fantastic opportunity, not just UK manufacturing, but manufacturing in general, but I'm very much focused on the UK, of recovery. Most people that we speak to now are busy, their order books are filling up. There's a great opportunity for recovery. But supply chain disruption is actually hampering that. And I know our business and as I say, our clients, we could all be doing quite a lot more if materials and indeed labour was available. So that's how it all came about. It was really sort of written as, how can we better manage the opportunities that we all have as UK manufacturers? How can we collaborate better, develop, nurture our supply chains? How does a make versus buy decision fit into that? How do we select our partners and, as I say, foster those relationships going forward? In one thing I'm always very conscious of is people talk a lot about UK productivity, that it never recovered since the 2008 recession. I have a slight issue with that statement because that productivity measure is actually value add per employee. It's not about people working harder. So that it hasn't recovered. So it really is about what opportunities are there for UK manufacturers, growing UK GDP, rebalancing trade, putting wealth back into the country. And I feel certainly there's a real sense and purpose and a real opportunity right now. And it's where that make versus buy sort of fits into that overarching strategy. As you said earlier, I'm not suggesting for 1 minute reshoring everything's the answer, because it clearly isn't. Global supply chains are important, but that is the nub of the article, Nick.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, obviously, what I want is everybody to pitch in with their own contributions and ask questions of Tony. I must say that one line stood out for me, Tony, in what you wrote when you were saying that up until recently, it had just been lean. What was it? Lean at all costs was the driving philosophy. And now we're talking about agility. We're talking about collaborative relationships, and of course the technology that allows both those things to take place in a much more proactive and constructive and productive way. Is that a reasonable assessment of that?
Absolutely. I think it's the same as part of that change and that paradigm shift in technology. I think all of us now as consumers have actually driven this, because as consumers now, we want things quicker, faster, cheaper, and we want them the way we want them. So it's almost this period now of mass customization. And that's why if you look at certainly UK manufacturing, many of the factories that we once had in the UK where we were competitive, a generation or two ago, producing larger volumes, much of that has gone out to the UK, not extensively, but a lot of it's gone. But we have some brilliant UK manufacturers now that have reinvented themselves and have got, and using digital models, automated models, everything associated with, I don't like the phrase, but Industry 4.0, etc. They've reinvented themselves and they're decentralized. They can customize, they're agile, they're quick, they're responsive. It's not about size, scale, and just stripping out cost.
So what are the threats, Tony, that you perceive? I mean, with every opportunity comes obviously a challenge and a threat. What are the threats that you're looking at?
I think the biggest threat is the one we've just mentioned. It's the potentially slow adoption of technology. It's a well-documented fact, Nick, that in the UK, again, outside of certain sectors, UK manufacturers, certainly the SME community, has been very slow to invest and adopt new technology. Again, I don't like the phrase Industry 4.0. I think it causes more confusion than anything else, and it confuses the hell out of people. But the adoption of new technology is pretty essential to be competitive, to be agile, to be responsive in a global manufacturing environment.
With the flip side of that, if you don't do that, then there's an existential threat to those companies who don't get on board.
Absolutely.
Okay. Obviously, please, from the floor, the usual thing, if you know how to do it, and I don't, and not everybody has the hands up tool available to them. I don't know how or why, but it's a mystery to me that only Zoom can resolve. But please use that if you want to jump in. Yeah, okay. Oh, sorry, that was a message from you too. Right. Anybody got any thoughts or questions that they'd like to pose? Lisa, I put you on the spot because you posted on LinkedIn yesterday about a survey that was conducted in the United States among manufacturers there about what their priorities are currently in terms of supply chain and so on. Would you care to just go over that, and we'll see how that meshes in with what Tony's been saying?
Only if you don't object to me looking at my phone, because that was quite early yesterday morning. Bear with me just a moment.
Oh, I'm sorry, I did put you on the spot, didn't I?
You probably did.
As Lisa's title suggests, she's an expert in cost management and procurement, so she knows of what she speaks.
All right. So I found this article in Supply Chain Dive magazine, and it was really rather interesting in that it was 337 respondents surveyed, looking at drivers for their consideration when they're looking at reshoring their supply chain in particular. And this is completely American. And the bit that really stuck out to me was that 23% said the top factor was total cost of ownership. But as you scroll down through the article, the moderately important factors, price per unit was 100% important, along with availability and lead times. Now, it's been my experience when doing product costing that cost per unit and total cost of ownership are rarely consistently giving you the same supplier. And then when you add in things like aligning your quality to the quality expectations of your customers or your market, then it all kind of goes a little bit pear-shaped. So the fact that the supply chain was coming back with these contradictory opinions about the importance of various elements was really quite interesting.
Does that surprise any of you? Those things, Alison in Atlanta, you are in America, so perhaps you could comment on what Lisa's just been talking about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, just from, not that I agree or love the idea that that's the priority, but ultimately, I think really right now, it really does come down to availability. Where, in fact, this morning, I just spent an hour dealing with one particular issue on a piece part that is holding up a $250,000 order. And because of that one tiny little piece part, we're not going to be able to ship it this month. And ultimately, it comes down to our customers' requirements of whether or not, even if we were able to make that piece part, if we would be allowed to make that piece part, or if we have to procure it from an approved supplier. So I think that as time goes on, we're really going to have to start thinking about getting out of our own way to approve things like backup suppliers, or, you know, we're so used to doing things on a specific checklist of if this, then this. Well, if you can't get to point A from point A to point B using the method that you're doing, the definition of crazy is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
That's really interesting. I mean, you say you can't get this one part. Have you only got a single source of supply? You must only have a single source of supply.
There's a specific cage code, a specific cage code called out on a print for a particular manufacturer, and that manufacturer is overseas, and they can't get the part on shipping containers fast enough. And we are far back enough in the line with a small enough order that we're not priority. So when things do finally, when it gets rolling again, it's still going to take time. So it's going to be a matter of how badly does our customer need that final assembly? Will it prompt any sort of conversation on, okay, we'll give you an alternate supplier, or we will allow you to make that part that ultimately you're trying to buy from somebody else.
Yeah, you're in the aerospace sector, and so I imagine your ability to source is quite constrained by some fairly rigid restrictions on that. Andy Dobson, good evening. Your hand's up, but your video's off. I don't know if your video's working, but either way, welcome. You got your hand up.
Yeah, first of all, apologies. My video's off because I'm eating dinner in the middle of Kiev. So yeah, I thought probably best not put my mastications on fully online and recorded forever and ever. Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on what Lisa said, and it's fascinating because if I go back 6, 7, 8 years, few people got the whole sort of TCO. So TCO, yes, is sort of coming up. People are having the sort of road to Damascus moments where they realize that a cheap piece price doesn't necessarily mean a good quality on-time product going out the door to the client so we can all get paid. So yeah, I mean, I guess the aspiration is there, and people kind of, at a hypothetical level, get total cost of ownership. But your procurement departments, 9 out of 10, are still talking the old talk. PPV, want 10% off the supplier this year. Yeah, we're going to buy 1 million from China. And yeah, we'll just put them in a big warehouse and that's fine. And I don't necessarily agree that we can. I don't think we will in the short term ever get back to everything on our doorstep being made. So China will still be supplying, for the next 20, 30 years. But there's definitely a feeling of we should actually be looking at, if not reshoring, then nearshoring. So the stuff coming out of China and bobbing up and down in the sea for 6 weeks is just not going to cut it. Something that's around the corner, okay, at a better quality, at a slightly more expensive unit cost, but with the ability to get sort of instant feedback, is going to become the distinguisher between the people that, as Lisa said, do the same thing and expect the different results, and the businesses that fly and prosper. And I think, like I said, people are waking up to it now, and long may it continue. But I think we're some way away from this sort of fully integrated supplier into our business model. I still think procurement particularly tend to be siloed, and I know that's a generalization, but when did your procurement department actually go to one of their suppliers and talk to them? Question to the audience.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I'm going to just mute. There we are. Great. Who'd like to pick up on that? And Tony, does that resonate with what you're thinking? I mean, I'm hearing opportunities for contract manufacturers to step into the breach, but it's a question of how you do it.
I think Andy made some really good points there. I mean, the one I think about reshoring, it's everything centric back to the UK is actually an impossibility. That's never going to happen. That's unfortunately, would be a complete fantasy. But I think with local content regulations coming in now, certainly having supply chains that are more maybe parallel supply chains, having suppliers close to home, as you said before, that's a definite. We're seeing that. In fact, we're seeing it with some of our clients that have historically put work out into India, Asia, Eastern Europe, now under very sort of strict guidance to find suppliers, contract manufacturers much closer to home, ideally in the UK, if the competence exists, the capability exists, and commercially it ticks a box. But I think also Andy made a good point about the fact that we talk about TCO, but then, do all purchasing departments act with that behavior in mind? Often not, but then I think you come back to how people are measured. people perform and people act on the way that you measure you measure them. So if purchasing teams are incentivized and, dare I say, rewarded on cost down, possibly cost down at all costs, then you can hardly blame the people that are performing that. Because that's, I mean, I remember quite some years ago with a client that I would never reveal the name to, talking to their purchasing manager, and we were talking about a certain commodity that he was very pleased to have bought into the business, and it was quite a significant cost down. And he basically told me, but it is a pile of rubbish and it will fail within 15 to 18 months, but it doesn't matter because it's outside the warranty period and I still get my bonus. So when you hear that type of language, I'm not saying that that's indicative, by the way, of the procurement professionals, and it was a good few years ago. So I would agree with everything Andy said. Basically, supply chains are complex. There's not a one size fits all.
Yeah, I think Jeremy Bowley, who I referenced earlier, he can't join us. That's a great shame because he'd be jumping up and down at that story you've just told, Tony, because he says, and it was quite enlightening when he came on to talk about it. He's saying that procurement can be a professional procurement department that's working hand in glove with all the other strategic aims of the business, can actually be a competitive advantage. A good procurement professional, if all you're ever doing is just going for the lowest cost to get under the bar set for you by your board or by your boss, then it's going to be the old garbage in, garbage out sequence all over again. Phil Kernock, I'm so glad you could join us. I know you had some connection issues earlier, but I'm delighted to see you because you're something of an expert on all this, and I wonder if you'd like to jump in the conversation.
God, I wouldn't say I'm an expert. I've just been in procurement and operations all my life, really. So in Airbus, Rolls-Royce, BAE Systems, and then managed SMEs at MD level. So I've seen it from both sides and all sides, and running national supply chain programs. I think there is a wide range of issues, a lot of dynamics going on, a lot of changes going on. I'm seeing now from my umbrella kind of roles, the dynamics on the aerospace sector, for instance, is a good one with the reduction in aerospace workload and that capacity being made available. Well, a lot of SMEs are diversified, as Tony said, and they've gone and found alternative work. And then when the aerospace companies have started to come back with their order books and started to look, then they haven't necessarily got the capacity anymore. So they're having to look in alternative routes. So I think diversification is great, but then is the company willing to grow that business further, that SME, to create that additional capacity on top of that again? And that brings in lots of other issues concerning skills, availability of people, and lots of dynamics there. So we've also seen that there's a lot of different business models, business strategies really do drive defence sector businesses in how they shape their supply chain engagement. I won't name no companies, but some defence OEMs in the UK really do specialise in being solution providers. So they actually do need the supply chain heavily. So they put a lot more effort into relationship development with the supply chain and work very closely with them and help them develop as well, because they need that supply chain coming up with new solutions to put in front of their end customers. So, and because it's a high technology product, then you need to have a lot of supply chain around you. So there's the other end of the extreme. Yes, the higher volume work, low cost sourcing. I've also seen in the aerospace defense sector, motor industry procurement people coming in to the sector. And what's their skill set and background? Low cost sourcing. It says it on their CVs, and they're coming in trying to put low cost sourcing strategies into defense project based businesses, which is just not practical. It doesn't work because the volume isn't there, and it's very much bespoke individual pieces of equipment. So lots of different dynamics going on, but I agree a lot with some aspects, Tony. The bit about lean, I didn't agree with so much, Tony. Just really because I think lean delivers agile, responsive businesses anyway. So it's a deliverable, which delivers the lead time reductions and the solutions. So I think they go hand in hand. I don't necessarily think lean's being dropped off. I think the continued focus on lean needs to continue to happen, and continuous sustainable improvement is vital. The industry across all industries, and continuous improvement. It's just the pace of that continuous improvement in line with what the business can actually cope with, and that's, on the bottom line. Sorry, that's my two pennyworth.
No, super, Phil. Thank you very much. Tony, don't there's anything in there where you want to pick up on?
I think Phil's exactly right, and I would endorse what he said. I don't think it's anyone's abandoning lean, because lean is about waste elimination, which can support agility and support lots of other things and support competitiveness. I think it's when you see businesses that relied on lean at all costs and scalability and size to get the piece part cost down. That type of business now, certainly in the UK, is not so common. So it's how you blend lean with the ability to be agile, because nowadays it's getting the piece part or total cost, should we say, of one being acceptable, not just the price of 1,000, because of this desire for a customized product. I mean, it's all of our customers for PP work in capital equipment, metal cutting, packaging, processing, semiconductors, etc. And we're having a conversation about machine tools today. And if you go and buy a 4-axis machine tool today, you'll pay a certain price for it. What I can guarantee, the price for that 4-axis machine tool will be less than it was 5 years ago. And it's got to perform better, cut quicker, have all of this technology. If you went and bought a BMW 5 Series 5 or 6 years ago, you'd have paid a certain price. Go and buy it today, you pay more for it, and you accept it's going to cost more. So in CapEx world, you almost got the perfect storm of customers wanting it at a lower price, they want it quicker, they want it how they want it customized. And that drives a lot. That now drives modern manufacturing, I guess, is the point I was making. The other point, and it comes back to a point that Philip just raised, is about what mechanisms and what support is there for industry sectors to develop the supply chain so they are fit for purpose. So sharing in growth obviously came out of the aerospace sector from some of the primes. You've had fit for nuclear. I think it's how can we create the collaborative coaching culture, because it's okay banging the drum, and saying to end users or manufacturers, reshore more, buy more from the UK, bring it more central. But if that manufacturing competence and capability doesn't exist, then you have to go offshore. There is no alternative. Yep. And I think I mentioned in that article, Nick, if again, some of our customers buy very large machine castings. Well, there's nowhere in the UK that actually does that type of machine casting anymore. So you go to Korea, you go to Eastern Europe, because where those foundries once stood is now the site of a supermarket or a housing estate. So that's the choice you have to make.
Yeah.
I'm wondering about Ewan, hand up, terrific, thank you. Hop in.
Yeah, hi there. Quick question for Tony, really, just coming back to the whole sort of the make versus buy sort of question, and just how much of that do you drive when you go into your customers and sort of, take them through a sort of almost a Q&A process to educate them on it, versus how much is driven by your customers coming to you, say, look, we've been through this exercise and this is what we've sort of come up with. I'm just interested. Yeah, hi there, Tony.
I think from our own perspective, when we engage with any new customer, the first thing we don't do is try to sell them anything. So the first thing we do is to try and understand what their pain points are, what their aspirations are, where their pinch points are, because without actually understanding what they're trying to achieve, outsourcing is not a silver bullet for anything. So the very first thing we do is sit down with the right people and say, guys, what are you trying to achieve? why do you think outsourcing might work for you? Where does that fit into your overall manufacturing and supply chain strategy? So that the first thing is not to try and sell anything, but to understand. I always say, work with the end in mind. What would good look like? What you're trying to achieve? What will it look like in the numbers? What will it look like in performance? So I think very much it's just starting with that collaborative sit down approach, and we actually see a lot of potential opportunities that when we sit down with a client, we say we're not the right partner anyway. So whether outsourcing is right or wrong, that's a different decision. But certainly knowing what we're competent and capable of, we wouldn't be the right people to work with. We might know some people that could be a good supplier for you. So I think, with any form of contract manufacturing, we know what our core competences and capabilities are. And I think, that's your starting point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I just remember going, it was back in a few years with Hayward Tyler, and we went through a make versus buy exercise. And one of the biggest challenges was actually to overcome was the sort of, with the employees themselves coming to the conclusion that they didn't need to make everything, because they thought that, if they make things, then it's going to be keep them busy, and therefore they're going to remain in a job. And they'll get paid at the end of the month because they're being kept busy, without actually thinking, well, if we redeploy ourselves and our time and our effort and do something else which is greater value add, then actually we're probably going to have a stronger future and a brighter future, because we can then reinvest. And actually then going through that exercise, that sort of educational exercise, both for us and for them, was really, really valuable. And then as soon as you sort of present it in that way, then actually you get, all of the change is driven internally rather than being driven either from the top or being driven externally, which is really powerful.
I agree. And in the 20 years I've been at PP Control and Automation, all of the new clients that we work with and outsourcing for the first time, the objective has never been to get rid of people. It's been to support growth. And that it's very much the case. And as you said, it's about getting more value add per employee out of those businesses and growing revenue and growing profit. It's never been, can we outsource and lose some people? That's never, ever been the objective.
Yeah. Thank you.
Stephen, good evening.
Hey, good to see you. Good to see everybody, particularly Tony. Really enjoyed your article. And I was curious about just one particular thing to keep this brief. You mentioned tools to help with this make or buy decision, but I think a lot of the discussion we've just been having is around pragmatic decision making rather than necessarily on a cost benefit basis. I just wonder if you could comment on how you make decisions, maybe in PP. Is it on not gut feel exactly, but what's the balance between your understanding of the market and your actual numbers that back up decisions like that?
Yeah, hi Stephen. I think when you talk about tools, we utilize a number of analytical tools within PP to actually sit down with a customer to look at the potential value that outsourcing might bring them. Because it's almost bringing it back to that total cost of acquisition. So once we actually understand what the client's trying to achieve, it's going through a model where you're actually inputting our customers' costs, their hourly rates, their overheads, their operations, their touch points, their supply chain. It's basically modeling everything and then overlaying that onto what they believe that would free up in terms of capacity and growth potential and what they sell their units for, what their margins are created. So it's looking at if, and it's a bit always a saying if outsourcing will allow them to grow their revenue, it removes constraints, it will grow their profits. It's almost then creating a model that you can sit down and put in front of an operations director, a financial director, to say, on this basis, on this model, if we do this, we've actually got some hard numbers to work with, and we use the customer's numbers. And it just gives some, because as you said, it has to, and it's not completely scientific and it's not infallible, but it gives people just a starting point. So as you just said, it's not just a gut feel that this might be the right thing to do, because that's not enough to make a strategic decision. So we've developed different models and tools where we can just put those numbers in front of different people, different stakeholders, because an operations director's pain is typically very different to the FD's pain, could be different to the CEO's pain, could be different to engineering director's pain. And it's how do we put that and model it together?
And how does it work for you at PP? How much do you buy in?
We do a very similar thing. So there's things that we used to do years ago that we outsource in our entirety now. The models that we develop for clients, we actually use within our own business. So we've found outsourcing partners ourselves in all sorts of areas where we've just looked, taken a step back and looked and saying, is that really adding value to our business? Is that the best use of resource, of floor space, of cash, of time? And so we actually use similar models internally that we use with our clients.
Is there a feeling that there's a lot of sufficient capacity in UK manufacturing, if only the channels of communication and collaboration that then follows were sort of forged and opened up? Is there a feeling there's a lot of untapped capacity in UK manufacturing? I'll ask it of Tony, but please, others join in.
I can only comment on what I know, Nick, in truth, and I think that's probably very market specific. So I think it would depend on the commodity, on the market you're in. When you touched upon, people mentioned aerospace earlier, it's very different. So my comment would be that's not a one answer fits all. It would be very dependent on what you're looking for, the competencies, the qualities, the approvals, the requirements, the volumes, and lots of other things. That would be a very complex answer. That there are people on this on this meet that are probably far better educated than me to answer it.
Well, the reason I asked the question, Phil intrigued me when he said that there were people from automotive. Sorry, did you say people from aerospace going into automotive or vice versa? But either way, looking for work elsewhere. Yeah, and that means that if they're going out hunting for work and finding it, even at a time as bizarre as the one we've just gone through, then there must be capacity if there's work for them to find. I mean, Phil, I don't know. I'm quoting you, so tell me if I've got that wrong.
Yeah, no, it's particularly defence sector. Defence sector has not got hit by COVID, really. So the defence sector, and what happens there's a huge number of manufacturing companies that work in both the aerospace and defence sector. They might work in some in energy as well, in other sectors, pharmaceutical, a spread, but there's a huge number. And the defence sector didn't get hit. In fact, the defence sector has grown, and there's more work coming out on defence. The Defence Industrial Strategy through the MOD is releasing more work out into the sectors, and there's a hope that defence sector additional spending will actually, help out with this aerospace lull currently, because the aerospace sector is in recovery. So it's hoped that will do that. So I think it's a defence. It's, as Tony said, it's a defence sector specific issue there, and an aerospace specific, and the dynamics around that. But what happened was that, what I'm saying is that there are motor industry procurement people coming into defence sector OEMs, trying to look at bringing in motor industry techniques of procurement, historical procurement style approach of low cost country sourcing, and it just doesn't fit the model, because the defence sector is very project based, and very bespoke equipment in all it does, everything from UAVs to tanks to marine ships. It's very, very complicated and very bespoke. So bringing in that style in approach to procurement just doesn't work, unfortunately.
Thanks, Phil. Another issue, and I don't know. Forgive me, Tony. I can't remember if you actually mentioned it in your piece, but I'm wondering to what extent, and to a greater extent as we're heading towards 2030, whether the carbon question is going to come into play, and whether that is going to start influencing buying decisions, because it may cost a little bit more to buy something in the UK, but if I don't know if carbon taxes are going to come in on imports, but that is definitely going to sway the issue, is it not?
I think the whole sustainability, environmental impact and questions are only going to, and quite rightly, increase. And I think it will put increasing pressure. Again, it will start in certain market sectors first with certain larger end users, maybe certain larger OEMs. But to me, it has to make sense that, having things on, I don't know, I'm not quite sure whether global logistics will ever quite be the same again. I guess it will, at different rates of recovery, but having suppliers closer to home, having suppliers potentially working collaboratively in hubs, that has got to make a lot more sense from an environmental perspective than everything being put on boats and planes and being flown from Asia or LCGs elsewhere. And I'm sure it's the same across other sectors and in other countries.
Thanks, Stephen.
Just on that sustainability question, I've been part of a lot of discussions around this recently, and I'm just wondering, do any of the manufacturers here think that the UK could differentiate itself as a green producer, as in designing products that are built for use and reuse and using green energy? Does that sound like a realistic future for UK manufacturing? I kind of hope it is, but I'd like to see a bit more evidence, I think.
Well, I know who I want to address this issue, Richard.
I thought that might be the case. Yeah, the UK has done very, very well with the wind farms, and it's going to continue. What they do after that is going to be quite difficult. As one of the board members for Make UK, they meet up with the B5, with the cabinet, and every single week, Alkar Shamar is always saying manufacturing is going to resolve all the problems to do with the carbon issue. So they're very much supportive. I was at a meeting with the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, the Growth Hub, and Bees, so to saying, look, EDRF money finishes, what do we get for our money with these SMEs? What do they actually do? Are they increasing their productivity? Are they starting to take on sustainability? So obviously I'm a very good showcase for that. Answering the question is, it's down to the SMEs to actually take it on as a challenge. Crystal Doors winning the Queen's Award, very much, yes, it's a brand value that we can start exporting. Tomorrow morning with Greater Manchester, I'm talking about the Queen's Award and about exporting. But it's down to those individuals. What worries me the most is the biggest distributor in the world, who's now got the cross stock, which is fully automated. That'll be shifting 1 million items a day. That's all coming from China. Already one of the distributions, 800 containers a day to feed our appetite of saying, let's buy the cheapest product. So I was really, really impressed with what Lisa's saying, and sort of where we're doing on procurement is we need to look at the word value. Value from cradle to cradle, from how it's extracted out of the earth and how it's then put back into. And that's when we'll start getting the understanding, what's the impact on people and their well-being? What's the impact on the planet? Not just the price. And it's when the procurement people wake up and the simple numbers of, I can count, the kids at 3 can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do we understand as adults and as a much more developed society, we understand not just price, we understand the other implications. And it's not about, can you get all the supply? It's the real values of people's lives and of the planet that we're actually damaging so badly. We do know, and it is going to change dramatically. Yes, us in this country will survive. Well, what's about the other third of the population that are out there that won't survive past 2100?
Yeah, and congratulations, Richard. You're a shining light in this. So it's funny. I mean, I wonder if I'm, as you've probably gathered, I'm not an SME manufacturer or an S manufacturer who's had to cope in the last 5 years with, being encouraged to adopt digital manufacturing technologies. Now they're being encouraged to adopt sustainable manufacturing technologies and processes. You've really got to be on the ball and to manage all of that. There's a lot of pressure on smaller manufacturers, is there not? And I know you've embraced it, Richard, but I'm wondering if anybody else would care to comment about the pressures that the sector's under from this constant sort of drumbeat of adopting the technologies that will allow greater flexibility and agility, and also will enable greater sustainability. But it's a lot to take on board. Anybody like to hop on that?
I think they go hand in hand, Nick. I think in terms of, I don't think you can separate them, because digitalization can actually be an enabler for sustainability, environmental as well. So I don't think it's a case of having to focus on both. I think they're joined at the hip.
I would totally agree with you, but I'm sort of, if you like, saying that there must be smaller manufacturers out there who are feeling a lot of pressure, and I'm obviously hoping. I mean, the government spending money through Made Smarter, and people like Stephen are working flat out to try and persuade smaller companies, of the value to them, not just to our economy, but obviously the bottom line at the end of the day is to our economy. Stephen, can I put you on the spot there? Just can you give us a sense check of where the mood is? How far has the mood shifted since September 2017, when the Made Smarter review was made public?
Sorry, are you thinking specifically of sustainability or digital?
No, digitalization, the mindset, the mood inside smaller manufacturers.
Okay, so I can only speak for the ones who get involved in our program. So kind of by definition, they self-select. But what I would say is it's such a diverse range of companies that's got to bode well for UK manufacturing as a whole. But what it always takes is an evangelist. Someone like Richard, really, who's got a passion for this. Because ultimately, I mean, we all know this, don't we? It comes down to cash flow. You've got to be able to demonstrate the cash flow that's coming from the investment in digital. So some things are no-brainers, but of course, what government would like to do, and I think what UK manufacturing needs to do, is push the boundaries yet further and yet further. So, and the same is true for sustainability, although that's kind of lagging behind the curve. To be fully, well, I'm not quite sure of the right phrase for this, but let's say fully efficient, fully productive, whatever that may mean. Yeah, we've got to be pushing into more advanced forms of digital technologies, so automation, robotics, and so on. Not simply 3D printing and not simply sorting out ERP systems. So although a lot of companies are on a journey, they're not necessarily thinking about the sunlit uplands that they could reach. They're just thinking about what they can reach in the short term that's going to add to the bottom line. So there's something that government needs to do, but there's something also that we need to do in terms of our ambition to keep pushing further and further.
Thanks. That's interesting. Ewan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to add, I don't think it is quite, it's never black and white, is it? In terms of, you don't have some companies which are, let's say, digital, some which are sustainable and others which are not. I think a lot of SMEs are actually probably, if you went into them and spoke to them, they're probably more digital than you might realize, and they might even be more digital than they realize themselves, because it's a sort of, it's an evolutionary process rather than a revolutionary process. So, where does it start? It might start, again, from a sustainability perspective. It may just be as simple as, well, they begin to buy more of their energy from, a sustainable source. And they almost do that by default without actually necessarily thinking that that makes them a sustainable organization, but it's sort of one step in the right direction. And so I think it's, part of almost the challenge or the opportunity is to say to a lot of these businesses, well, actually, you've already taken your first step. You're already moving in the right direction. So, don't be scared of sustainability or don't be reticent about digitalization, because actually you're already doing it. So it's not quite that big, scary sort of headline that you read about and think, oh, well, I could never do that, because, often that's the way it can be portrayed. Are you either doing it or you're not? But I think a lot of businesses out there are actually have already started, but don't necessarily give themselves the credit for having, perhaps got further along the path than they thought they were.
Yeah, Thanks, Ewan. Phil.
Yeah, back to Stephen's point. Stephen, we know each other pretty well. We're connected through a mutual business value chain through Tom Dawes, and just a couple of things on what Stephen said. I talked to Richard about this, actually, Richard Hagan, I think, over emails, about shining lights in the industry. People that lead the way and lead the charge are absolutely key. If ideally you would love to have, you know, a good shining light leader in each section, in each sector, in each region of the country that really led the way from SME perspective. That would create greater momentum than anything else, because peer-to-peer conversations are the most valuable thing that happens. We have running a webinar in a couple of weeks' time, and it's not consultants, it's just 3 SMEs talking through what they've deployed in digital to other SMEs. So it's peer-to-peer conversations. It's not, and that's the best message to get through. They've learned the lessons, they've gone down the cul-de-sacs, and they're willing to share that with other people. And that's really important. And that's the best way of getting the message out there. So I totally agree on the shining lights thing. It works very well. One of them is A Aerospace, Peter Brook's business, is talking, Nick, on 5G. They're the first 5G SME in the Midlands. We want SMEs in the Southwest to do that as well. So, you know, they're going to be talking through their journey. So I think that those kind of peer-to-peer conversations are really key.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear which business that was, Phil.
A Aerospace, Peter Brook.
Right. Oh, yes, actually, yeah. Okay.
Because they're the first 5G SME going in the Midlands.
Okay. All right. I must say that now that you mentioned it and the way you couched that, Phil, the peer-to-peer rather than the top-down, I suspect there's been a lot of, yeah, and hey, you know, as media, we're the channel through which a lot of top-down sort of didactic lecturing goes on, and we like to maybe, you know, put our 2 penneth in as well. But it is true, isn't it, that this greater collaboration, and Tony mentioned that, if we're sort of coming back full circle, Tony talked about how greater collaboration rather than, you know, out and out competition in the sector is going to lead to progress. It has to, because the best will pass on their wisdom. And
yeah.
I'm talking of which, I'm sure, Tony, people are going to be contacting you offline to talk about some of those tools, the models you developed, because they sound really effective, and you know, working with people instead of working for them. And I'm just wondering, am I correct in saying that the experience so far is that the primes and the OEMs are ahead of the game on this? Are they encouraging greater supply chain collaboration and not being yeah, overly prescriptive? I remember talking to Warren East. Now, this is going back 3 years, 4 years, and he was saying, he was using quite hard language about suppliers, say if they don't want to get with the program, they're not going to work with us anymore. It was almost as if, you know, get tooled up, get digitalized, or just don't bother knocking on our door in future. And I thought that was, I don't know whether he was being, you know, saying it just for effect, but it didn't sound terribly collaborative to me. And if that's Rolls-Royce, you know, you're beginning to think, oh, heavens above. But is the attitude changing out there? Like, anybody got any thoughts on that? I don't know. Okay, Phil, I'm gonna ask you if you can pick up. I mean, just because you have so many contacts in the sector, I'm just wondering if you're feeling that the primes and the OEMs are actually behaving in a more collaborative and, you know, mutual.
I'll be very politically sensitive here.
Oh, why?
certain companies you've mentioned have a history file of working and operating in that way, that all of us know across the industry. As I said before, there are aerospace and defense companies that are very collaborative and do it because it's a business need. Others see the supply chain as an extension arm of their business just to operate and literally hack cost out of and lead time reduction. But also, I think there's another dynamic that the OEMs have in this country, particularly in the aerospace and defense sector, is they have a lot of drive from offset obligations from around the world that has been driven into the market. So if they're going to get business from airlines in the Far East, then they have to put facilities out into the Far East. They have to support their supply chains in country by putting work into those countries. So governments in other countries have forced the agenda to make the supply chain come to their country. Have we done that in the UK? No, we haven't. And as a consequence, the other countries have been pulling our major OEMs to go and build factories abroad. Yeah. So it is down to policy, government policy as well, and the dynamics of it. Other countries are riding roughshod over us, and we're not responding.
I think that's a very good point. And anybody who read the mission statement I wrote, I quoted in there David Sainsbury, Lord Sainsbury, former science minister in the Blair government, saying that smart policy, we have to have the kind of smart policy that Phil's just outlined, because all our competitors are doing precisely that. And we've got to stay in the game, not necessarily even stay ahead of it, because I'm not certain we necessarily are. Listen, it's 3 minutes away. Before we go, I want to change gear completely. And in a sense, that reference to the mission statement was something of a cute segue, as we say in the biz. I'm going to share a screen right now. Can you all see that website, UK MFG Unite?
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah.
Tony Haig started this. PP control and engineer and automation were the inspiration behind this website. And I know that some of you, many of you, actually are members already of it. I'd just like to announce to us, this is not a public announcement, that Tony has done us the honor of asking us to look after UK MFG Unite and use it to help us with our BHAG, which, as we all know, is to try and get manufacturing front and center there in government policy. I'm absolutely thrilled that this is happening, and Tony, I can't thank you enough. I think it's for us, it's a great responsibility, and we're really looking forward to working on it and putting some energy into it and growing it, not as a kind of not just another body. It's more of a voice rather than a body, but it has its own network as well, which I'm sure many have already found helpful during the perilous times when you started it. So thank you for that. Thank you for the initiative, and thank you for putting your trust in us to pick it up and take it on. So we're really excited by that. And Tony, thank you for joining us tonight. I'm sure we all agree that was a really great focus that Tony brought to the conversation, and really happy that so many of you obviously found it thought-provoking as I did. So I'm going to say good night, and thank you all, as always, for being such a great group. I'll keep you in touch with what's going to happen, because I will be asking individuals to step forward and help us, because the new website, the UK MFG Unite website, it's not what we do full time in business. So I'm hoping that I can perhaps get some of you in harness to help us make a reality of what we're put in our mission statement. So good night, everybody. Thank you very much indeed. Great to see you. I'll be in touch next week. And Tony, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Cheers all. Good night.